Hi, this is your host Sapil Bharti, and we are here at KubeCon and CloudNetiCon in Paris. And today we have with us once again Julian Fischer, CEO and founder of Anynines. Julian, it's good to see you again in person.
Great to see you too. It's been a while.
It's been a while, but I'm also happy to be able to see each other in person as well. We talked a lot online, but the in-person is different, and that's why I want to talk about this conference. You are here, you have had a lot of discussions, you may have been through some talks, you have talked to a lot of people. Talk a bit about where is this ecosystem heading based on these discussions.
First thing to mention is, I think we have to distinguish where the ecosystem is headed according to a lot of the talks, especially the keynotes, because they suggest that everything moves towards AI and that AI is everything. And I met quite a few people being annoyed by that, right? Where it is absolutely an important topic, they may have overstepped that a bit. So I think there's more than just AI at the moment to figure out. At least that's what I sense from talking to our clients. It's not that they figured out how to use Kubernetes in their organizations and finalized all that. So there are a lot of foundational stuff that still needs to be done and covered.
As you said, that the reality is different than, of course, there's a lot of buzzwords, they keep happening, and we as industry have to talk about them, but the ground reality is different. So I want to go back to some of the ground reality from the early days to today, when you are here today and you're like, hey, these pain points are still there. People are still juggling between those. What are those?
What we see among our clients, it was already a sample bias there, but our clients are usually large corporates. And I would say managing fleets of Kubernetes clusters is still an ongoing challenge. In particular, well, the data service automation resonates with us very much. I mean, that's quite natural. And therefore, managing Kubernetes, a lot of Kubernetes clusters, and managing data services across Kubernetes clusters, that's something we've been looking at for several years. And it's interesting, but it's still an unsolved problem. And a problem that we basically put into our focus a while back. And I think now we've figured out how to solve it and how to address it properly.
Can you talk about some of your own projects that you're working on, which are aimed at solving these problems?
Yeah, we got something coming up. It's maybe a bit early, but among us, So one of the things, if you have a lot of Kubernetes clusters, Kubernetes clusters, some of them, they do isolate workloads in the sense that whatever you need to do, it's put on the Kubernetes cluster, and the Kubernetes cluster is self-contained. But how often is this really the case? So if you're on an infrastructure, for example, like AWS or Azure, you often also consume services from AWS or Azure. If you're on-premise, you also need to take care of databases, connect applications. And if it's still that challenge that if you have a lot of Kubernetes clusters, where do you put your data? So in the early stages, I thought, well, you develop operators, you put the operators on Kubernetes, you maintain the data services next to the applications, and this will do the trick. We figured out over time that this is not what customers want, because it also makes it hard to understand, for example, well, what are the Postgres instances that are affected by the last CVE? How do you answer such a question if data service operations is scattered across many Kubernetes clusters? You need a certain amount of central governance in order to comply to security standards and get things right. So we thought about what we had in the Cloud Foundry days, right? Where you'd have a centralized marketplace, a cloud controller that knows about all the service instances. And we thought about, well, the Kubernetes ecosystem looks different. You have a lot of Kubernetes clusters. So how can you bring the two worlds together? How can you take the lessons learned from the Cloud Foundry ecosystem and transfer it to the Kubernetes world? And we came up with a new technology which is called Klutch. like the clutch in a car, Klutch brings together applications and data, and it's the place where both come together. A spoiler alert, Klutch will be open source and released under Apache 2, so the release is currently in the making. And what Klutch is about is providing a management cluster that's central, at least to a region, and you can deploy as many application clusters you want, Kubernetes clusters. So in every Kubernetes cluster, you install a small extension that will introduce custom resource definitions that will represent for each data service you want to integrate, service instances, service bindings, backup and restore, for example. And with that, application developers in local application developer clusters can create, let's say, a Postgres database or a MongoDB database locally. But the actual execution of that request is executed using a pluggable automation backend. So it will talk to the Klutch server, where it centrally registers the creation of that service instance and will delegate the heavy lifting to an automation backend, which could be the Anynines data services for Postgres, or it could be the AWS Postgres, which provisions a pod, or it could be Amazon RDS. So in that sense, Klutch helps to abstract where the Postgres database comes from, and it will allow on-demand self-service for the application developer. So creating a service instance, scaling a service instance, creating a backup or restoring a backup will be done as if the data service were running local, where it actually runs someplace else. And now if you think you have 100 Kubernetes clusters, many application developers, and now there's the security officer asking, well, where are the Postgres service instances and what versions do they have? You can basically talk to the Klutch server and retrieve that information with ease. So yeah, that's what we've been working on. What's still in the making is providing that abstraction, allowing for local developer autonomy while providing that central governance.
Can you also talk about the focus or evolution of Anynines?
I mean, we've been involved in data service automation for quite a while. Now, Kubernetes becomes ubiquitous very quickly. So every data center there is, you'll get some sort of Kubernetes, whether this is on-premise or whether this is in a public infrastructure. So for us, it doesn't make sense to provide a Kubernetes as a service product. This has already been saturated and commoditized. And that happens so quickly that for us, it doesn't make sense to claim that aspect of Kubernetes. Instead, we just went back to our clients and asked them, where are your biggest pain points? And one of them was managing data across fleets of Kubernetes clusters. But if you think about that specifically, you also see that there are adjacent challenges. For example, the model I've just explained with Klutch does not necessarily apply to databases only. It applies to a variety of data services, and even beyond that, cloud services in a broader sense. And surrounding that, you also have problems and challenges such as how do you do dynamic security in a situation where the data service instance is located someplace else? So the Kubernetes cluster there's where the applications are could reside in a different AWS account, could be in a different OpenStack project, so to say, and how to open that network connection, but restrict it to only, those clients that are also allowed and authorized to access that service instance. It's one of the challenges which we'll solve along the way.
So if I look at Anynines as a company today, and we look at because it's a big ecosystem, so what is specific problem? Because that also helps in, hey, this is what they're solving, this is what they're focused on.
We call it the Anynines Hub, and it's the collection of tools we now have, including the data service automation backends for creating virtual machines based on Bosch automation, the data services based on Kubernetes operators creating pods, as well as the upcoming infrastructure integrations for AWS, Azure, GCP, and AliExpress, Ali Cloud, that is, based on Klutch. So we're also talking about marketplace, console, and upcoming billing features, evolving around how to manage cloud services in a broader sense. So that's basically happening under the umbrella of the Anynines Hub, which is a collection of the tools I've just described.
While in the beginning you said, that we are talking a lot about Gen AI here, it is still in the early stage, but automation, AI is a big, and everything can be superset. It can start with a simple thing like, you said Klutch, but in the cars, automatics, they solve that. So automation has, and we have talked a lot about automation. So even if we let go of the buzzword Gen AI or AI at this point, talk about the importance of automation when it comes to data, and once again, how Anynines is kind of helping with that automation.
By the way, the metaphor of Klutch does not necessarily refer to an automation.
I was just playing on the word, automation.
But the original intention was that you have two moving parts that you need to join together, and you need to have that place where the friction actually happens. That's where the metaphor comes from. So, by the way, there are certain electric vehicles like the Porsche Taycan which still have a gearbox. But nevertheless, your question about AI, it's an interesting one. We actually glance into, what are the cloud services you would want to expose and automate over time? And if you think about AI tooling in particular, there's a lot of AI tooling that is basically a distributed system with a complex lifecycle to manage as well. In that sense, it resembles the definition of data services in that it is stateful and distributed. So it could be that we integrate at Anynines AI tooling in the future as well. When it comes to generative AI in the context of, let's say, coding, I would say it becomes a standard tool that every developer should have access to solve day-to-day problems, where we also have to state there are limits to it. So if you're an experienced developer and you're working in a deep domain problem where you also have to have this domain understanding and it's non-trivial, the outcomes of generative AI is fairly limited. If I, for example, learn a new language, and I know how to express it, but I'm looking for the syntax, well, LLMs are a great thing to do and great thing to have. And I think there's an evolution towards becoming more purposeful and more helpful down the road. However, I think, with every trend, there's a certain exaggeration. So I think we'll see a lot of AI-based products downstream, but I'd say it's a very interesting tool. I use it very often already, but there's still some work engineers have to do themselves.
Can you draw a contrast between AI, Gen AI, and automation? You touched upon that briefly, because automation is really happening. You folks do a lot of, and automation is also very, very critical in modern world. So if you can talk about that, when we talk about Gen AI, we are not dismissing automation. That's importance is there, which is real.
If you think about automation of data services, you have to ask yourself what exactly is the scope. If you're, example, integrating existing automation backends such as Amazon RDS, well, the depth of the integration from the code complexity standpoint is fair. It's not zero, but it's fair. It's basically building a complex adapter with a lot of configurability, as these services are already fairly complex. If you think about on-demand provisioning dedicated service instances, however, that's a complex domain problem. So it's a distributed system. If you want to test, for example, a clustered service instance such as Postgres with a cluster manager, it's a relatively complicated thing to do. And you would see that even commercial products not often cover edge cases in those cluster managers 100%. So I think generative AI can only go so far as these problems have been described by humans already. And not talking about the problem that the more generative or generated source code there is out there, that there's a feedback loop, a negative feedback loop into feeding those large language models with content they've already produced, which narrows down the variability of output they produce. So I would say, as it is right now, they are not capable of solving very complicated domain problems in the space of automation. However, I'm pretty sure that more and more use cases will become easier to implement due to the use of those things, because it's not every use case of automation is particularly hard. There are a lot of things that you just have to write down properly. And I think there's some room for improvement in making automation cheaper. But as a CEO of a company, I do not conclude that I have to lay off 20% of my engineers. You see a lot of layoffs, and I'd say some of them is also following the prediction that AI will make those jobs obsolete. Maybe that's necessary to get, to keep stock prices up, but whether this will really manifest that fast, well, we'll see.
When people look at Anynines, and you're like, who should look at N9, whose problem you are solving or should solve?
Well, I'd say if you're building an in-house cloud platform and you're struggling with either a cloud foundry that you would like to replace with something that's more cost effective, then we're still the number one alternative, so to say, to the big vendors. And the second case is that of managing fleets of Kubernetes clusters, and how do you integrate data services there, whether this is using infrastructure provided services or on-demand providing services. I think the knowledge we gained around building Klutch is very valuable and worth sharing.
So when we look at potential clients of Anynines, what kind of teams are your target audience?
It's always a pleasure to talk to engineers, for sure, right? So wherever they're from, if they have technical problems and challenges that they see we are talking about, happy to talk to them. But often it's platform teams who own the internal platform or parts of it or teams of it, or smaller teams of the broader platform team that will reach out to us and talk about individual aspects.
Before we were discussing, you mentioned CLI. So no pun intended. What else is in your pipeline?
Oh yeah. So I think at Anynines we've learned that we also want to engage with the community and make our products more accessible. So we've built that AWS Postgres operator, and one way to use it is using the N9 CLI, which just recently came out. It is a tool that allows you to create a local development cluster using Minikube or Kind. It will install a Postgres operator, the AWS Postgres operator, and you can right away, experience and create Postgres instances, a clustered instance with streaming replication set up for you, automatic failover. So if you want to develop a web app, for example, locally, or you just want to try out AWS Postgres, download the N9 CLI. There's a tutorial linked on the website. You'll just take 15 minutes and it'll guide you through the creation of a Kubernetes cluster, install the operator, and deploy a demo app with ease. So it's a fun thing to do.
And what was the reason behind creating N9 CLI?
If you think about installing a database operator, you'll have to think about, well, what are the prerequisites of that operator? For example, our operator depends on the cert manager. So you have to install the cert manager, but not any version, a particular one. Then you have to install the operator itself, which has multiple components, so you have to download the specs and apply them as well. So with the CLI, this is all taken care of you. It's been reduced to simple steps that you could easily execute as single commands. But the CLI is not there to hide away the technical complexity from you. It will exactly show you the specs it generates or it takes from somewhere. We'll print them out for you and will show you what are the kubectl command it will execute for you. It's basically like you'd hire an engineer who will show you how to install the software and make you learn what are the steps necessary to do so. So you can use it to install such an environment, create a Postgres instance, and we'll also generate the manifest for you that you could then edit, modify to your needs. So it's basically like a faster version of reading the documentation, so to say. It's about building in some guidance and make it simpler and more fun.
Julian, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course, give us a great overview of Anynines, the whole ecosystem. Thanks for all those updates, and as usual, I look forward to chat with you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. As you said in the beginning, it's great to see you again in person. So hopefully we have some time to chat later on. It's always so much fun. So hopefully see you soon again.